Welcome to season 2 of Now in North Korea. Our first session of this season has an interesting title, New North Korea 1, which is introducing the most updated aspects of North Korea in mid-2020s. We selected three subjects, North Korea's architecture, semiconductor, and tourism. First, North Korea's architecture, construction, and real estate market. North Korea has built and boasted new grandiose buildings, including upscale apartments, especially in Pyongyang, which demanded many resources, including workers, often labeled as 돌격대, stormtroopers, in construction sites. These buildings' architecture has their own North Korean style and has many stories in it. How can they accomplish this construction project last 10 years? Professor Harrison Kim of University of Hawaii will detail its current status as well as answer our questions on this intriguing subject. 2. North Korea semiconductor politics. Have you heard of the North Korea semiconductor industry? Well, North Korea has their own brilliant IT engineers who are often labeled as hackers for cryptocurrency these days. They need various types of semiconductors for industrial as well as military purposes. How do they acquire these precious strategic assets? Tom Remish, the economic policy analyst of KEI of America, will share his expertise on this subject and will answer our tricky questions. 3. North Korea's tourism. The North Korean tourism is nothing new, but surprisingly, multi-million foreigners from China, Russia, Europe, and South Korea have had a very unique experience in the most closed society in the world as a tourist last 3 decades. Nevertheless, after the pandemic in early 2020s, the door is mostly closed for the outsiders. Is there any hope to take a look at North Korea in the near future? The most experienced North Korean tourism businessman, Simon Cockerell of Korea Tours, will share his take and answer our questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this very special program, and it's an honor to meet you as well, Professor Beck. My name is Chiyoung Harrison Kim. I am an associate professor in the Department of History at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. My specialty is modern Korea and especially North Korean history. Looking at the history of urbanism and, of course, architecture in North Korea is a very poignant way of understanding North Korea's social structure and also its power structure, and not to mention its ideological development and, of course, its international relations as well. Once you arrive in North Korea, Pyongyang, these are the sites that you see: the statues, the tower, the infamous Ryugyong Hotel, the exquisite and enormous monuments. But the other side of Pyongyang looks like this. It is a very urban metropolis, Pyongyang is. And of course, the city of Hamhung, the second largest city of North Korea today, is also a very urbanized city. And other than the monuments and the statues, the cities are filled with what you can call vernacular architecture. So monumental architecture is architecture that symbolizes the power and the hegemony of a place, but it can also symbolize things like the church or the military or even educational centers, institutions as well. Vernacular architecture are buildings, built environment that's about taking care of people's livelihood, housing, workplaces, even entire neighborhoods, including parks and so forth. After the Korean War, North Korea was an enormous place of international cooperation for reconstruction. So, for example, the Soviet Union basically rebuilt Pyongyang. East Germany was instrumental in rebuilding the city of Hamhung. Poland was a very important player in rebuilding Cheongjin and Nanam into one city. Sinuiju in the northwest, of course, the Chinese military was very influential and did a lot of work there. Bulgaria built schools and hospitals. And of course, the Soviet Union also aided in bringing equipment and technology to many factories, including the most symbolic ones like Hungnam Fertilizer, Kimchek, Supung, Pyongyang Textile, and so forth. So it is important to remember that North Korea's beginnings involves a great deal of international cooperation and solidarity that was hinged on the hierarchical landscape Soviet, the state socialist world. And after World War II, it was almost a duty for all these socialist countries to help rebuild North Korea. This was, of course, heavily emphasized by Moscow. So in the 50s, you see this kind of newspaper articles throughout the 50s and 60s, how North Korea is grateful for international help. Okay, so Pyongyang was rebuilt after the Korean War with Volgograd as a model. Not Moscow, not Berlin, but it was Volgograd. And during the period of Stalin, it was called Stalingrad. It is not a big city. It's a city of 1 million, 2 million. And Pyongyang was originally designed as a city 2 million. And by the end of 1950s, Pyongyang was a very urban city. You see the People's Army Street here that was very wide and that extended from the Pyongyang train station. The Stalin Street, very important street, and apartment buildings that rose up on East Pyongyang, rebuilt with the help of China. So by the end of the 1950s and especially by the mid 1960s, Pyongyang and North Korea was far more urbanized than South Korea, far more. So we do see in South Korea the beginnings of planned urbanization in Seoul beginning in the 50s and 60s, apartment complexes and so forth, but not to this extent. By the time end of the 1960s, the basic structures of North Korea's urbanism was complete. Now, we can go into details like this was based on the designing of a micro district, micro rayon or Soguyang. That was the smallest unit in which neighborhoods, living spaces, and workplaces were designed together. And many Soguyang made up a urban center. One very famous Soguyang is number 87 in West Pyongyang, and today that is where the infamous Ryugyong Hotel exists. Okay, a very important practical and regulative concept was the notion of efficiency, and within that, one famous example was the 통방 panel example. 조립식 방법 통방 panel, and these were basically a rectangular block of concrete made of concrete, and they were basically stacked on top of each other to increase efficiency and speed. So this notion of one apartment assembled in every 14 minutes became famous for becoming the Pyongyang speed. Pyongyang 속도, one apartment in every 14 minutes came from this period using one room panel part. Anyhow, so my point here is that both the monumental and vernacular sides of North Korea's architecture both contain utopian and utilitarian features. Even within vernacular forms of architecture like apartments, it had utopian notions, state being able to organize and control and shape people's livelihood through efficiency. This is a very ideological and utopian notion, of course, and even within monumental architectural forms, you see very utilitarian features where the concept and practice of bureaucracy becomes a very important way of organizing the masses. So at the heart of Pyongyang, even today, is not a house of rule, but a house of learning. Right behind the so-called the leadership podium, Chuseokdan, in central Pyongyang, is not a government building, but a very large, grand people study house. It's a big library that is at the center of Pyongyang. People outside of North Korea don't know this quality feature very well because usually in the media, we only see the leaders standing at the podium featuring the marching of the soldiers and the missiles. But what is right behind that entire facade and the spectacle is a gigantic library and a place of learning. So that kind of embodies the initial ideology of urban planning in North Korea. Now, this does not mean that this is more democratic or more peaceful. No, that is by no means the case. So this is instead an expansion of state power and state bureaucracy, where the government is is secure that to control the people, you need more than violence and you need more than power. And what you really need is education and learning. So this is one excellent example where the center of Pyongyang's urban planning was a house of learning. Hamhung is an extremely interesting case. East Germany was involved in rebuilding the city from 54 to 1965, and they built not only the city center, but also the outskirts and the suburbs. So when you see pictures like this came up in the mid 1950s in Hamhung. These buildings do not look like Korean buildings. They look more like European, Eastern European buildings. So, modern apartments in Europe for ordinary middle class people. And here's a nice photo of North Korean and East German workers together. Here's an interesting case. The Hamhung Provincial House of Culture that stands today, that was finished in the 1960s, European in style, and it resembles slightly the Bauhaus building that stands in Dessau, Germany today. The Bauhaus building, which is a landmark and a symbol of the Bauhaus movement. The most symbolic place Hamhung's reconstruction was the Wilhelm Pieck Avenue that runs through the center of the city, named after the first president of East Germany, Wilhelm Pieck. So here's the early models and the reconstruction process, and this is how it looks today. So many of the photos that I'm showing you are the ones that I took by myself in 2014. Now, from the 1970s and on, the memory of this incredible transnational past goes away. Incredible moment of solidarity and cooperation begins to fade away in North Korean history and in the media. And from the 1970s, you do not find articles of cooperation with foreign countries all too much in North Korean newspapers. So today, even the name of Wilhelm Pieck Avenue has been changed to Cheongsong Avenue. Okay, so 1970s and 80s was another remarkable period in North Korea's urbanism. Pyongyang became the spectacle city. It became the model city for the world to consume and to witness. And within the space, the larger context is that beginning in the late 1970s and 80s, North Korea saw itself as a vanguard of the Third World movement and of post-colonial anti-imperial movement. And the architectural boom also occurred within this context. Now, North Korea's industry until the early 80s was still thriving. Their machines were working. Their production facilities were making steel. Now, this was beginning to decline in the 80s for sure, but the building and the architectural projects had already begun, and there were some incredible monumental structures being built, like the Mangyongdae School Children's Palace, completed in 88, Cheongyugan Restaurant along Taedong River, completed in 81, that seats 1,500 people. The famous Twin Tower Koryo Hotel, finished in 1985. before the Petronas Hotel in Kuala Lumpur with a bridge that connects the two buildings. Oh, the futuristic Bingsanguan, the ice skating rink, finished in 1981. And of course, the infamous Ryugyong Hotel. That began in 87, but it took more than 20 years of completion, and it was finally completed in 2013. And today it functions as a hotel and events area. Not all the floors, it's 100 stories tall. Not all the floors are working, but we know that at least 20 or 30 stories in the middle is a functioning place. And it was completed with investment from Egypt, from United Arab Emirates, and with some Chinese investment as well. And also France. France was also a big investor. Chuche Tower on the right, completed in 1981. Another important moment in the 1970s and 80s we see is this expansion of apartment buildings, apartment complexes. So Changgwang Street was a model street during this period with very modern and cosmopolitan interior spaces. Now, in the 1980s, North Korea was also very aware and keenly competing with South Korea. And of course, South Korean economy and the building boom of 1980s was an incredible story on its own. And North Korea, of course, was pressured to compete with South Korea and remake the urban structure into more of a living space, more of a, I guess, residentially friendly place, just like South Korea was doing. So we see a similar event taking place in North Korea where there's a lot of investment in apartment construction as well. But of course, when it comes to apartment construction, North Korea never reached that point where it provided enough housing for everybody. So if you're an elite person, a party member, or if you had a good job, your housing was secured. But for many people, especially in the rural area, what I understand is that provinces were left to their own means of taking care of housing. Okay, some recent examples have some recent news about North Korea have largely been about its new urban development. So today, what we can say is that this kind of new boom in urban development in North Korea is for leisure and consumption for tourists that North Korea is hoping will arrive, and of course, for the new wealthy class. And we know now that North Korea has today pretty strong upper level class that is an economic class. So wealth that has been gained through trade and markets and through investment as well. So this is a hearsay, but I heard recently that most expensive apartment unit in Pyongyang can go from $100,000 to $200,000, which is such an incredible story. I mean, so there's this side of North Korea that we see as isolated and underdeveloped and poor, but the other reality of North Korea is that they are investing a lot into urban renewed structure as well. Now, we must say that these buildings are mostly targeted for the elites. So we're talking about 1 million people, 1 or 2 million people within the boundaries of Pyongyang. Most recently, we got a very interesting dose of the latest completion, the Galma Resort Complex in Wonsan City. So this is part of Wonsan. So Galma Resort is part of the Wonsan area, and Galma is a peninsula. It's a small, beautiful peninsula. I've been there myself, and it has been a resort town for a very long time, for hundreds of years. In Korean history, Wonsan has always been known for its beauty, for its trees and the mountains and the ocean. So Wonsan naturally is this amazing merger of mountain and the ocean. And it has always been a beautiful area. And today it's turned into this. I can't say that it's beautiful, but it is surely something that resembles a very Western kind of resort style. And North Korea is hoping that this is where the new wealthy class will visit, and also tourists from Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and of course China. So I am toward the end of my presentation, but maybe I can just finish by saying that North Korea's urban areas is a very vibrant place. Most of the middle class and ordinary people, they still live in kind of old, a little bit worn down structures like this. This is something that I took in 2014. But the city is teeming with people. It is a vibrant place now with markets. It is a place where people go on dates, students have fun, workers and bureaucrats are walking around. So it is a truly a cosmopolitan place. Let me finish my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Yeah, I think I learned a lot about this North Korean history or genealogy of architecture. Last 70, 80 years. And I have, plenty of questions, to ask. Let's start with this human resources. I mean, people in this in architecture and then construction in general. And who are those people who made it out this monumental architectures, and then especially those who design and an architect, of course, and then engineers are very important, and
Right?
then ordinary workers. We know that the North Korea doesn't have enough those mechanical tools to have or
Right.
expedite and then those the process, but the people are there. But we know that those MG generations are quite different from the previous generation. But North Korea also have MG generation, but they have some different value systems, and it might be quite challenging for the North Korean authority to incorporate those or convince or persuade them to just work in a very difficult and hard conditions in the construction site. So what's your take?
In North Korea, construction sites from the beginning, okay, we're talking about 1945, and especially from the post-war period, and even today, um, much of the heavy lifting and the non-technical work is done by volunteer work.
Volunteer work.
Volunteer work. So these are students, these are soldiers, these are residents who volunteer their time on weekends, on Saturday and Sundays. These are people who organize themselves from other neighborhoods and regions, and they come gather to build and to complete a construction project. So, sometimes they're called 돌격대, especially when there's a time limit and it has to be done. And 돌격대 is often translated as shop workers.
Shop
So,
workers.
so people who come in and are able to finish a project in a relatively short time. North Korea, but also in all socialist countries, there's a history, so-called shop workers, and many of them are volunteer people,
Mm.
students, soldiers, and people from other areas coming in together. A big problem that North Korea still has not overcome. So of construction is done by hand. So there is heavy machinery, and North Korea has a lot of heavy machinery, but it's never enough. It's not like
Mm.
like in South Korea or
Mm.
in the West. So
Mm.
while heavy machinery may do the big work like laying down the pipes and lifting the steel frames and so forth, but other types, majority of the work, it requires an enormous number of people. And this is when the volunteers and the students and the soldiers come in. You know, they are compensated in a way. They're compensated with food, they're compensated with honor, and sometimes even a very small wage. But mostly these are projects that ordinary people are tasked to take on. So the very famous movie, Comrade Kim Goes Flying, 김동무는 하늘을 날다, perhaps the most famous movie, a North
Mm.
Korean movie that was shown outside, including South Korea,
Yeah.
김동무는 하늘을 날다. The story is about a young woman from the rural area. She's a coal miner, and
Mm.
she is very excited to go to Pyongyang to participate in a big construction project.
Mm.
And so we see this kind of process happening where young people from the rural areas are sent to big construction sites in order to complete a massive project.
Mm.
Now, so you can say that this is in many ways, a limitation of North Korea's economic power.
Mm.
That is, school still requires a volunteer level of work, but at the same time, one very alarming and uncomfortable part of construction work that happens throughout the world, including South Korea, whether it's the most advanced country or the poorest country, is that construction work relies upon irregular workers,
Mm.
vol day workers, irregular workers, workers who have no ties to any system, workers who have no guaranteed insurance or social service or welfare or protection. And very often with a suppressed lower wage, right? So this happens everywhere throughout the world,
Mm.
including South Korea, where big construction sites are completed, and they can only be completed with the help of
Okay.
irregular workers, and North Korea has the same phenomenon.
Hello, my name is Tom. I am an economic policy analyst with the Korea Economic Institute of America here in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to present today on North Korea's semiconductor industry, their domestic production, as well as how they receive access to semiconductors. I first got interested in this issue, one, from my time in Korea at Yonsei University. I spent a year as an exchange student there, classes on North Korean politics and society. But then later in my career, when the pandemic happened, there was a shortage of semiconductors in the United States, and semiconductors became a huge part of U.S. economic policy as it relates to export controls and limiting foreign entities of concerns access to advanced semiconductors because of their role in things such as war game modeling and quantum computing and artificial intelligence. So I got interested in this subject, researching for it with the North Korea Economic Forum at George Washington University. Before I get into this, I just wanted to read some news today that Korea's unification minister nominee Chung Dong-young said during his confirmation hearing that North Korea has 3 semiconductor factories in Pyongyang, Pyeongseong, and Wonsan. So this should actually be some good context as we get into this. So let's begin. The bottom line up front is that yes, North Korea has at least one semiconductor production facility known as the Pyongyang 111 factory, but for the most part, it relies on foreign import partners to receive its semiconductors. Of course, there are different types of semiconductors. There are the memory chips that we see in laptops and smartphones, and then we get to the advanced node chips, which you may find in GPUs for artificial intelligence. The second one poses more risk to national security, but nonetheless, both are part of North Korea's military and technological development. How I went through this? A few things. One, I went through US government intelligence reports, which were declassified, which talked about North Korea's technological development. And that provided some good secondary source material on the subject. Two, if you go to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., they actually have North Korean journals that you can browse through on site only, for at least at that time. These include North Korea's electronics journals, which contain a lot of information about their research capabilities and their aspirations towards producing semiconductors. So I have a quote here that semiconductor devices, integrated circuits, electronic calculators, and other modern automation elements and means are produced in large numbers and their quality must be improved. This was by Kim Il-sung in 1980. One of many such quotes that is from these academic journals. And moreover, this is a dismantled missile recovered in Ukraine from January 2024. A conflicts armament research investigation found the majority of its electronic components came from the United States. So this tells you a little bit about North Korea's access to electronic components, even when under comprehensive sanctions regime. So why is this important? Once again, if you have semiconductors, of course, you have smartphones and laptops, or perhaps television sets. There are semiconductors in anything from washing machines to cars. But if you have advanced semiconductors, you can do advanced war game modeling, you can do modeling of thermonuclear detonations, and then you could even use it for your hacking efforts and encryption breaking when it gets to quantum computing. Once again, there's a security element to this. But let's start with the history of the North Korean semiconductor industry. A little hard to pinpoint unless we go to North Korea and talk to them ourselves. Of course, North Koreans have said before that their semiconductors come from China for the most part, so that's an easy mystery there. But they still had an academic industry for this. Even while they were targeted under Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, or COCOM. So an intelligent estimate by the United States found that prior to their mass import of materials to build a huge semiconductor manufacturing base, they had about 10 electronics factories in the country. And then a US intelligence report in 1969 recalled them receiving production equipment from 2 companies in Japan that allowed them to be capable of producing up to 10,000 integrated circuits a week. The 10 plants that I mentioned before this were built using Chinese or Soviet support. And one North Korean electronics journal article I found talked about a 1958 visit by Kim Il-sung to Kim Chek University of Technology, touring a semiconductor materials laboratory, which it then stated is now the Semiconductor Integrated Circuit Laboratory. So we know that they're not just talking about semiconductors as a material that conducts electricity. And relevant to the comments by the Unification Minister nominee today, there are also reports of a Haeju semiconductor plant and a Dancheon Yongye Army semiconductor plant, but present status is unknown. Here on the right is actually just a picture I took of one of the North Korean electronic journals. If you read through them, oftentimes they'll give you some good anecdotes on, the attention paid to this industry. Of course, you can see here they're citing the IEEE and other foreign reference points, which gives you some indication as to their level of attention to foreign research. So moving past the 1970s, one semiconductor factory that we know of, Pyongyang 111 semiconductor factory, was completed in 1986. This was actually using United Nations Industrial Development Organization support. It started as a prototype facility and then it transitioned to a full-scale facility in 1989. A map by Andre Abrahamian and Curtis Melvin pins it within the State Academy of Sciences, which is in the Unjiang High-Tech Zone, as they point out. And then, of course, we get other visits by the North Korean leaders to different sites, talking about the importance of semiconductors. But even though they had this factory, reporting in the New York Times from their first ballistic missile launch in 1998 showed that about 30 to 40% of the semiconductors in the missile were sourced from Japan. I think this leans a lot into their leveraging of trading companies and overseas communities, as well as perhaps smuggling to access this type of technology. We also see a 2009 press release of Kim Jong-il inspecting the Hamhung Semiconductor Materials Factory. And Hamhung is the site of the Hamhung Computer College, where it is known to be a grooming area for North Korea's notorious hackers. So this is a potential site relating to their electronics industry. Of course, a caveat to this semiconductor materials factory, that doesn't tell us a lot, again, because the word semiconductor can mean any material that disperses electricity. But the presence of the computer college gives us some clues. So beyond the factories, now the factory itself, U.S. intelligence estimates show that it had low yield rates and it operated in the micron width scale as opposed to the nanometer width scale. There is a lot of academic research going on at Kim Il-sung University, Kim Chek University of Technology, and Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. So these universities all appear to have semiconductor departments for research. And then Unit 121, this hacking group, is actually known to have a supercomputer made using imported computers. And in China's case, their own supercomputer is reportedly made using American CPUs. So that gives us some indication as to how the Unit 121 supercomputer might be operating. Now, how did they get semiconductors where they don't produce them themselves? Well, North Korean diplomats posted abroad are likely capable of using a diplomatic pouch to smuggle. North Korean trading companies as well, historically, which may have been posted in other countries. Central Party Bureau Number 9 is in charge of importing computer equipment, and the National Defense Academy is active in acquiring technology from abroad. Overseas North Korean communities in countries like Japan were often targeted as willing collaborators. But presently, when it comes to smartphones or laptops, China is the likely source. And there have been some break-apart examinations of the North Korean smartphone that just show it uses Toshiba and Taiwanese hardware, likely smuggled through third-party countries. Now, North Korea's high concentration of rare earth elements also gives it an edge when it wants to make official deals to access semiconductors. For example, I think one recent deal showed that North Korea offered rare earth elements in return for access to technology, including semiconductors. And smuggling doesn't appear to be as difficult as smuggling manufacturing equipment. We all heard about the DeepSeek upset in China that was reportedly created using imported NVIDIA chips that came on flights going into the country from elsewhere. Again, on March 10th, 2025, a North Korean smartphone producer made an agreement with a Chinese technology company to acquire semiconductors in a rare earths for technology deal out in Sunueju. And troublingly, on March 4th, 2024, South Korea's National Intelligence Service issued a letter warning that from at least 2023 onwards, North Korea has been increasing hacking efforts targeting South Korean companies in order to steal designs. Now that raises an interesting question. Is North Korea using those designs for their own factory? Or are they selling off those designs as a way to get some illicit money? And then last on that point, when Vladimir Putin began to increase his collaboration with North Korea at the Vostochny Cosmodrome, where North Korea is now very present in the Ukraine conflict, Putin offered technological assistance in return for his exchange with Kim Jong-un. That is the gist of my presentation. If you'd like to learn more, I wrote a paper about this for George Washington University North Korea Economic Forum, and here are some of my selected references.
Great. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive presentation one more time, and it's pretty interesting for you to uh, research on the semiconductor industry, say, improve this manufacturing capacity of semiconductor industry in the near future, or just try to find a way to acquire the semiconductors, from other countries, including China, South Korea, the United States, and of course, Taiwan. Now, you made a presentation on their level of the North Korea semiconductor industry. Of course, it's even nano level, it's more micron level. That's the nano level, semiconductors is indispensable for especially in the military use. What's your take on this issue?
Yeah, so of course we've all heard about North Korea's Juche self-reliance ideology. Now I'm not an expert on to what extent they are still following that, but to maintain military modernization or economic modernization in the long run, I would imagine that they would probably want to develop some form of self-reliant access to semiconductors. And judging by the faculties at their research universities, they seem to be capable of it at least, and at least make domestic progress toward research in that area. And they're certainly interested. But on a day-to-day basis at the citizen level, I think they are reliant on using imported semiconductors, especially for things like electronics. Now, it's troubling the fact that Unit 121 appears to have a supercomputer, and given North Korea's hacking efforts abroad, what they may be using that for, as well as what type of semiconductors they want to use to power it, and their ability to perhaps collaborate with other countries to do that on their own, will be something to keep an eye on. But the fact is, the United States had a semiconductor shortage during the pandemic, so therefore, in North Korea's case, it would be very difficult to not also have that type of dearth of supply.
I agree. Recently, the Ukraine government demonstrates that Russian missiles and drones use semiconductors, as you just said, made in the United States, made in the South Korea, made in Taiwan, of course, made in China. How do we compare the Russian and the North Korean cases, which are non semiconductor manufacturers in the semiconductor acquiring strategy from the various point of view?
Well, one, I think it would indicate that North Korea, or Russia in this case, gives military prioritization when it comes to access to technologies. In North Korea's case, to the extent that they may have a shortage of semiconductors, this would make me believe that they would be directing any semiconductors they have, or the types that they need, first to the military and then downstream from there.
So, and you mentioned about the North Korea's the large volume of rare earth material in this dynamics of semiconductor politics. How does North Korea use this rare earth material as a leverage, to acquire for the chips? This is a pretty interesting, argument. So, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so we just saw a deal announced where North Korea used rare earth elements as a means to access semiconductors. So it's definitely a major leverage. I think, if I'm not incorrect, North Korea has one of the largest reserves of rare earth elements in the world, which would be of extreme interest to technology companies who do business with North Korea, whether that would be in Russia or China. It'd be interesting to follow that a little bit more. But on top of that, North Korean gold and other elements have been found in global supply chains, where often they'll go to a Chinese smelter, but the origin, even in US electronics, I think it's been found that some of the gold has originally come from North Korea. So whether we know it or not, a lot of these elements do end up in our supply chains.
So then those rare earth materials, of course, gold, it's the leverage, the target of leverage to acquire a semiconductor it's probably not the United States, South Korea, Taiwan. It might be China, right? China is going to play a role of a middleman, to import and export, to the semiconductors into North Korea for sure, right?
Yes, and that is something I found in my research. Of course, there were a lot of instances of collaboration with Chinese telecommunications companies across the border. And of course, entrepôts like Macau often serve as an illicit financing hub. Also, the North Korean links with criminal groups such as the Triads. North Korea will also do
Mhm.
ship-to-ship transfers to
Mhm.
get to smuggle in things such as oil or others. And then North Korea is also a pretty big exporter of sand, dredged sand out of the Haeju Bay.
Mhm.
So they're maintained in this trade. And again, we know that a lot of these semiconductors come through China as a middleman.
We know that, Singapore and Malaysia, the two countries to connect these, semiconductor manufacturers and the importers in, Russia and other countries too. So it's pretty interesting, for us, to take a look at the relationship between among China, Singapore, and then Malaysia, and then say Russia and then North Korea too. Probably Iran later on.
And in fact, we now have this order, some people are calling it the CRINC of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. And to the extent that at least Russia and Iran are involved in conflicts, and then China and North Korea have their own relations with either of those countries, we may see more collaboration, at least between North Korea and Russia, into the future. And that would raise questions about North Korea's technological modernization and access to these technologies.
So basically, the United States export control of this strategic asset, such as semiconductors, and sanctions, UN sanctions, and then bilateral sanction and the multilateral sanction are not functioning, for preventing North Korea from accessing, this strategic asset of semiconductors.
I think they're doing that the best that they can. I think we'll never really know how much more advanced they would be without these types of sanctions in place.
Mm.
But
Mm.
it's difficult because semiconductors are so small, they can be easily smuggled. And so what would be more concerning is access to advanced lithography equipment, which you wouldn't really be able to smuggle since lithography equipment is the size of a shipping container. So I think the US government will probably continue down this path of small yard, high fence, of restricting
Mm.
access to these advanced technologies, especially as it relates to artificial intelligence and quantum
Mm.
computing.
So let's get started. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Simon Cockrell, and the expert and then known businessman in the North Korean tourism and beyond. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you for having me. So I'm Simon Cockrell, and since 2002, I've been the general manager of Koryo Tours, which is the leading organization taking tourists to North Korea, as well as innovating engagement opportunities like school trips, sports trips, coordinating events there, such as the Pyongyang International Film Festival, Pyongyang International Marathon, and so on. I've worked on a number of documentary films, travel shows on TV, and a dramatic film made in North Korea, as well as many other such projects. A key specialty of mine, though, is to extend the boundaries of what visitors are able to see and do and experience when they're in the DPRK. So over the years, I've been the test subject for opening up many new cities and areas and routes around the country, which then have become available to tourists, or in some cases have not become available to tourists. Places such as Hamhung, Sinuiju, a series of factories in the Nampo area, domestic railway routes such as from Pyongyang up to Rason and beyond, domestic flight routes, and smaller sites around Pyongyang and other cities and regions too. So the reason that I do this work and that my company does this work is we feel that engagement is a positive force in a place which most people would agree is overly isolated and with a population that deserve the chance to have more interaction with the outside world, even if it's just a little tiny bit more. So we approach this apolitically and with responsibility, and we've been responsible for a very large amount of the general information that the world knows about the realities of visiting and spending time in North Korea as foreigners, as well as starting many eminent writers, students, professionals, and so on their path in working in and around DPRK and with North Korean issues.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience. And I have plenty of questions, but let's start with your own experience. You just say you have been involved in those documentary in films and some other hot films and so on. And what are the most memorable or successful documentary films you ever get involved in the last 10 years or so?
Well, the ones produced by my company are from longer ago. Before that, just before I joined the company, we produced a film about the North Korean football team. There's a picture of Park Do-ik behind me, actually. Who played in the World Cup in England in 1966. And then I was involved in the next films we made about young schoolgirls performing in the mass games. And then the best one I've been involved in, I would say, is Crossing the Line, a documentary film about American soldiers who defected to North Korea in the early 1960s. At the time that film was made, our subject, Joe Dresnok, was still alive and living in Pyongyang. Now his family still lives there, but he has passed away. So that, I think, is probably the most unusual at the time, very unknown story. But I think that that's the most important and surprising story that I've been involved in terms of documentary films. But there have also been many other films made there that we've assisted with. I was partly involved in these Dennis Rodman visits and the documentary. There's a very good documentary that was made about those trips. So I helped with that a little bit. So we offer some assistance to people producing such things.
Okay, that's interesting. Dennis Rodman, he is one of the most popular figures in the North Korean political scenes, and he actually made a splash here and there, and we like to listen to. And then let's move on to your tourism business, and then usually those tourism starts from Beijing or Dandong, and then go to Pyongyang, and then Kaesong and Wonsan and Baekdusan, Mountain Baekdu. Is that really just typical or arrange the tourism that's the itinerary, or is it just typical for your own company and other say the tourism company too, or is there any other variation in it?
Yeah, so actually that's not a typical route. First of all, I'll establish there's the market before 2020, before it was shut down, was the vast majority of the tourism field was Chinese companies, tourists, hundreds of thousands per year. And their route is very much the same thing over and over. Train from Dandong to Pyongyang, stay 3 nights in Pyongyang, which is Pyongyang city tour, and then 1 day trip to Kaesong and to Panmunjom, back to Pyongyang, and then return to Dandong by train. But this is not dictated. This is what the market demands. There's not much demand for anything beyond that. So it's affordable, large groups, classic group travel. Our market is what the North Koreans call European travel. So that just means everyone who's not Chinese, basically. And the demand there is for longer tours, more variation, a lot of private tours. Still, of course, a private tour has North Korean guides with them, as every tour does. And then each of those tours is a little bit different. So the kind of classic tour, I guess, would be about 5 or 6 days. So usually it would be maybe Nampo, Myohyangsan, Pyeongsong, something like that. But then outside of winter, trips to Wonsan have been fairly common. Beach holidays, I'm sure we'll get to this. Beach holidays, they're not really a good reason to go to North Korea for most Western tourists. There are beaches in a lot of places. It's a long way to go.
The Mediterranean and in many places.
Yeah, it's a long way to go to do something you can do somewhere else. People make the journey to do something different.
But
And Paektusan itself is fascinating, incredible place to visit, but very difficult. So for tourists, the only way to go there is by plane from Pyongyang. And usually this involves chartering a plane, which is expensive. And also winter there is very long. And if you fly to Samjiyon in winter, then you may not be able to get to the mountain. So generally speaking, there are not that many trips to Paektusan just in summer, and generally larger groups because to split the cost of chartering a plane. So it's not that common a place to visit, actually. But these things vary a lot. It depends on the demand of the customer. So the itinerary is not dictated from above, but what is dictated is basically the list of places which can be visited. So you can only go where you can go, and you can't go where you can't go.
so meaning that that's the designated places in some city. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
there is no forbidden cities or the areas in
Oh, no.
general.
Most of the country is off limits. There, you can visit every province, but a couple of the provinces you can only visit, one small place. And even in a city that you can visit, let's say Wonsan, for example, you can't just go to Wonsan and then freely roam around Wonsan. When you're there, there are certain places which you can visit: the harbor side, the central square, museum, old railway station, a collection of monuments to the leaders of the country, school children's camp, various things like that, agricultural university, and so on. But you can't just decide you would like to go and visit this interesting building because it's interesting, or that place because you saw some people going there. You have to have a program and an itinerary, and that has to be sent in advance. But when that is done, there is usually a little bit of flexibility, but not so much.
Oh, okay. That's so meaning that I think this is, very stupid statement. It is not a possible for us to go backpacking in the North Korea.
It is possible to wear a backpack, but it is not possible to go backpacking. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of my dream, just taking, the truck from the Changmadang to Changmadang, and then go to city and to city and then to just take a around and what's their real life look like. At
Yeah.
the same time, I think it's your next probably arrangement for the National Geographic or BBC World Discovery Channel. Just following up this Changmadang people to city or the countryside to countryside. But it's very clear that the authority, the state, dictate, where to go, and you can ask about, I want to visit, or my customers and tourists, visit to client to somewhere, but you need to the advanced endorsement or permission, to go there. Wow, that's pretty big limit, but at the same time, shows the nature of the North Korean political system.
Well, it is a strict limit, but to be honest, most people expect more limitations. So, of course, from what we know about the country, we are conditioned to expect that limits are stricter. So, surprisingly, even though it is the most strict, the most tightly controlled experience that I know of, most people we take are surprised that actually there are some opportunities to do a little bit extra, or to change the itinerary, or to have more interaction. The same way that when we go there, the food is
Food.
it's usually okay, sometimes really good, sometimes not so good. But people expect it to be terrible or to be non-existent. So the expectations are low, and it's not too difficult to get above low expectations, really.
Yeah, so then now it's a Korean food. K-food is everywhere. It's become very fancy and then trendy. And then do you think North Korean food, NK food, it can be popular in other places too?
It doesn't lend itself to social media, perhaps in the same way. So maybe
Okay.
not. But
Maybe not.
it is a little. Let's say. I mean, they would say that it's purer. Let's say without too much influence from outside and so on, as if that's always a negative. That said, the food which tourists are served in hotels, for instance, of course, you don't only eat in hotels, but hotels do serve food. Sometimes this is kind of touristified Korean food.
Yeah.
And as most tourists are Chinese,
Mm.
there's a Chinese element in this. So you may have
Ah.
something classically Korean, like Pyongyang
Mm.
cold noodles, and then
Mm.
you may have mapo tofu, which is clearly Chinese food, you
마포.
know. Yeah, it's
어,
clearly
마파도.
that's Chinese food,
아.
even if it's served in Korea. So it's quite often a bit of a mix.
음.
And you know, if there's a salad, it will
음.
tend to be a Russian style salad rather than a
What is a
salad.
Russian style salad?
Has a lot of mayonnaise, basically. That kind of
Automated.
thing. I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
there are many Russian salads,
Uh,
but it would be that style. So often it's a bit of a mix. But yeah, of course, the food is broadly speaking Korean food wherever you
음.
are, and there's regional variation too. If you go to the coastal area, to Wonsan,
음.
to Rason, and so on,
맞아.
there's a lot more seafood, a lot more fish.
콜라 씨푸드.
And if you're in the Paektusan area,
음.
potatoes with every meal.
Potatoes in every meal. So,
Yeah.
and then what about, I mean, Chinese tourists are, of course, understandable, but, what about the so-called, European tourists? Do they find the North Korean food interesting, or what are the most, say, popular, North Korean food among these European tourists?
So they do find it interesting. And, these Western tourists, of course, they've all made a conscious choice to go to North Korea. It's
Mm.
nobody's first holiday. Nobody is there because they are, allied with the country politically. Nobody is there because they don't really know where they're going. There are, of course, some people collecting countries, some people trying to complete some project, but most people have looked at different places to go and have chosen to go to a place where they'll have no internet, limited connectivity with the outside world, somewhere that their family may be worried and concerned about them. So they've made a big choice and they want to get the most experience and the best possible value for themselves out of this. And of course, they have to eat. And food is something that some people are very passionate about. So people are generally keen to try local food and they would like to have as much variety as possible. So it's actually a kind of constant battle because a lot of our partners there are of the belief that people like their own food. So I've worked with many people from North Korea in China, and if you say, right, let's have lunch, they generally want to eat Korean food. That some people will try some Chinese food and say, yeah, this is good for Chinese people, we want our Korean food. So there is a kind of assumption that Western people have to eat Western food, whatever that may be, which I think is a hard thing to get through. So we try and point out that yes, people may not be accustomed to the taste of cold noodles, but you can never become accustomed to something unless you do it.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, beer is popular in North Korea, in Pyongyang
Beer,
especially.
대동강 beer, right?
Yeah, beer is popular, but beer is not from Korea. So at some point, somebody had to introduce beer, and people who were not accustomed to it became accustomed to it. So it is
Okay.
possible to, develop a taste for things. And as you mentioned, Korean food is popular worldwide, and North Korean food is still Korean food, even if it's not the same. So it's not completely alien. People
Sure.
have heard of, gochujang, and people have
Yeah.
heard of various
Kimchi.
other things.
Right.
It's not alien food, and it can be eaten by all humans.
So that leads me to my final question. You've been in this tourism business with North Korea for such a long time, 2 or even now it's now heading to 3 decades, right? I think it's Kim Jong-un. He stepped in as a paramount leader in 2012, in 2013. And he tried to promote his own country as a tourism, attraction, the tourist, spot, a destination. Before we know that Kim Jong-il doesn't take tourism that seriously, even though he can make some, the hard cash with the dollars. But Kim Jong-un's idea and approach might be a little bit different to the tourism. And then now the pandemic and a nuclear sanction, 2025 is a little, another, story, for the Kim Jong-un and the Kim Jong-un North Korean regime, to take on this, tourism. What is this, periodical, the change of the tourism industry for the North Korean regime? What's your take on it?
I don't have much to say about the views of the North Korean leaders because I've no idea. But there is no Ministry of Tourism, so there's not really a government body dedicated to tourism. The tourism there is operated by companies, state-owned companies, of course. They compete with each other. They compete internally, and they have what defines them as a company is that they have a profit motive. So they want to get more customers. They want more customers for their company versus another company. So there is a competitive element which will be familiar to people from around the world. It's easy for people to suggest everything is the government, but a state-owned company and the government are not the same thing. Every company is a state-owned company, so it's not necessarily governmental. I would suggest, though, that if you say there's been a focus on promoting tourism, there's still been no tourism for 5 years. So that is an unusual way to promote tourism by not allowing it. So they've had a tourism industry, technically and legally, since 1953. That was the establishment of their first travel company. Of course, nobody was going to North Korea in 1953. There was just ruined cities and destruction everywhere. Friendly countries, non-aligned and socialist brother countries had people visiting before then, but tiny, very, very tiny, except for some huge events. When I started working at Koryo Tours, the whole Western tourism market was something less than 500 people a year across the whole year. That's barely one person per day. I mean, it's not even around 20 years ago, you could be there, you could go there for a week and literally not see any other tourists. It would have to be a specific week and specific areas, but you would see nobody. That is long gone. So Chinese tourism has become huge. Hundreds of thousands of people a year. It's nothing like Thailand or Jeju or anything like that, but these are still big numbers. They even brought in a limit on Chinese tourists a few years ago of 1,000 people traveling to Pyongyang per day. But that still means that in any week, let's say 1,000 people went in, and then 500 people per day traveling to Sinuiju for a day trip, 500 people going to Rason. This is more than 10,000 per week is big numbers. Whereas the Western tourist market, the biggest year was 2012, maybe around 6,000 people in that year. So, and what's the stated capacity of the Wonsan Kalmar Resort? 20,000 people at any one time. So when people say it's built for Russians, there have been 1,000 Russians in the last year.
1,000, 1000.
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
There used to be, in 2019, there were more than 1,000 British people.
Oh.
So if tourism is some kind of crucial tool there, why is there none? There were hundreds of thousands of Chinese, thousands of non-Chinese, and now there are hundreds to 1,000 or more in total. So it's not quite clear what the master plan is, if there is a master plan. But the people I know, the people I deal with, they're business people. They're involved in the business of tourism. They're anxious to have it happen again. In February this year, there was a brief opening of Rason. Tourists could visit Rason, but only for 3 weeks. And then suddenly it closed again without warning and without any reason. There's a lot of guesses and speculation, but they are just guesses and speculation. And there have been other chances for people to visit. Some embassies have reopened. There have been some friendship groups, left-wing organizations did some trips. So some projects have begun. And I was there in April this year with around 200 people that I took to participate in the Pyongyang Marathon. But these are not tourists. They're not tourist visas. They may have been on a tour themselves, but their visas were supported by the DPRK Athletics Association, not by any travel company. And the marathon happens once and then it's finished. And so, what's next? There are international events there, which usually involve inviting people to participate, trade fairs, the Pyongyang Film Festival, and so on. But still, these are not general openings to tourism. So we still wait and see what's going to happen. But when the doors do open, I think that it's possible that initially at first, the number of places you can visit will be fewer than before, because the tours that have been happening for the last 18 months or so, these Russian tours, their itinerary is very much more limited than it was before, which is a pity because, as I mentioned, I've always specialized in pushing and going to more places and opening those places. But it may well be that when they open to us again, that we won't be able to start as we were 5 or 6 years ago. We may have taken a few steps back to try and push forward a bit. So a lot remains unknown, I'm afraid.
All right. Oh, my last question is, as though you are the tourism guy and you are managing many people and you saw all kinds of tourists from all over the places to North Korea. What are the no behaviors in North Korea as a tourist?
Yeah, that's a really good question and very important one. So everybody should ask that. So when we arrange a trip, we communicate with the travelers in advance, of course, by email, by phone, by WhatsApp, etc. We send information beforehand on the rules and regulations, and we also have a face-to-face briefing before they start the trip, or if not face-to-face, we do it online or by phone, but we always have a briefing explaining some practicalities, how to use the international phone and that kind of thing, how, what money to spend. But it's mostly about the do's and don'ts. And it's all don'ts. There's a few do's, but it's mostly don'ts. And it's fairly straightforward, to be honest. First thing is, don't break the law. Whether you agree with the law or not is irrelevant. Do not break it. But the laws are not secret, and they're not anything that you wouldn't assume. So, like everywhere, the normal laws: don't kill anyone, don't steal anything, don't vandalize or that kind of thing. But beyond that, you can't criticize their leadership. So as foreigners, we're not expected to be part of their political system. So we're not expected to join in or pretend to be something we're not. But do not make any overt criticisms. Don't damage any pictures of the leaders, etc., etc. Just keep it neutral. And you can't, as tourists, you can't go anywhere without guides. So every tour group, if it's one person or 20 people, has 2 guides and a driver. But your guides are with you all the time. They stay in the hotel. They don't go home. You can't wander off without them. They are responsible for you. So don't do it. Not because actually it's not risky for yourself. It causes a risky situation for someone else, for somebody who you shouldn't do that to. Don't compromise your guides, basically. Also, proselytizing is illegal. I mean, spreading religious activity. Being religious, of course, is not. There's plenty of religious people that go there. But taking in and spreading religious material is a crime. And, people must not do that. And if they can't obey those laws, then they shouldn't go. There are plenty of countries where those laws do not exist, and you should maybe go there. I mean, the long list of don'ts, we get very detailed, and people always have some specific questions, but it's important to know that. But it's also important to not panic. Going to North Korea is not that unusual. Literally millions of people have done it. The restrictions there are real, but they're not secret. We know them in advance, and the experience there is a bit like being on a school trip. You have your guides with you. They'll tell you, right, breakfast is at 7 o'clock, and then we go to the museum of this, and then we'll do that. Then we'll have lunch. Please tell me if you're a vegetarian. A lot of it is very straightforward, basic tourism. It's not something to panic about. And if somebody is scared to go, then they shouldn't go, quite frankly. Why would you go somewhere that you are scared of? But if you are interested and curious, smart, intelligent, sensible, then, if you're interested in North Korea is a fascinating place to go. But the world is big. And the reason that, thousands of Western tourists visited per year rather than hundreds of thousands or millions is because there are many other places to go. So I understand when people say, oh my God, I would never go to North Korea. Well, fine. Best of luck and go somewhere else. But for people interested in it, I assure you, it is life-changing, even with all the restrictions, even with all the things you can't do. It's a real, a place that makes you think.
Thank you. sharing your knowledge and experience, and at the same time, your excellent, the response to my questions. Thank you for more time, and then thank you, for the joining us. Okay, we will see you next time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.